Roughly 1 year ago, 2 games released to great success and cemented themselves as outstanding representatives of their respective series. One of them offers gorgeous visuals, action-packed boss fights, a mysterious world combined with interesting lore and a often criticized difficulty. Can you guess which of them I'm specifically talking about? Kirby and the Forgotten Land and Elden Ring are 2 sides of the same coin. I know, a sentence you probably didn't expect to ever hear, right? On paper, both of them target completely different audiences, offer very distinct experiences, and presumably have nothing in common. I mean, does this stand in any correlation to this? Yet, ignoring the almost ironically identical release date of only 1 month apart aside, I couldn't shake off the feeling something about these 2 titles is connecting them. After playing through a good bunch of Elden Ring, I was constantly reminded of the strengths of the Forgotten Land and how both games might deliver on different terms but use the same denominator. Where should I begin to describe such a ridiculous comparison? Even if you have never played either of those games, you are probably at least aware about their reputations. Elden Ring is without a doubt one of the most influential open world entries in the future, and pulls you in its harsh world with a demanding but fair challenge. There are surprises in every corner, and unlike in other so-called open world games, there's no magic arrow, million icons on the map, or schizophrenic monologue from the protagonist whenever something interesting is nearby. First and foremost, Elden Ring is simply a game, and every other pillar like story, narrative, graphics and music is conceptualized under this fundamental blueprint. You play the story, piece together the lore, and it's only up to you how much you want to see. There are only vague descriptions where to go, and whenever you meet a dead end, you can plainly go somewhere else and come back at a later point. No one is holding your hand besides the cold, dead paw of death. On the other side, we have Kirby, the presumably most joyous franchise in the world. Despite the fact Kirby games are normally extremely simplistic to beat, they are more defined by their accessibility. I'm not necessarily talking about easy modes, and we will come to that with Elden Ring, don't worry, but nudging you into the medium. Not without a reason is Kirby still considered to be one of the best first games to any casual player who has never held a controller in his hand. Still, Kirby strikes a perfect balance by being a game, just like Elden Ring. The tutorials are often highly brief or don't even feel like tutorials at all. The Forgotten Land's first level left an impression for so many players by immediately introducing everything the game has and will have to offer in a cinematic manner the series has never seen before. Star Allies and Epic Yarn might depict the exceptions, but usually no Kirby game is easy to a point where it feels brain dead to play, and the very same goes for Elden Ring. The only Souls-like I've experienced so far was the first half of Dark Souls roughly 10 years ago, so I have none basically. Going into Elden Ring, I was very surprised to see how well the game balanced its difficulty. The tutorial is skippable and nothing felt truly unfair since I always had the option to explore another place and get stronger. Besides, there were already so many options to cheese and make life easier. I couldn't even believe you could do that in a Souls-like. Summoning companions and shooting powerful magic from far away is a solid strategy to make any boss a joke, just like in Kirby Star Allies. See, I told you there are many parallels. But what would be a discussion about Elden Ring's difficulty without mentioning the topic of implementing an easy mode? A discussion as old as humankind itself probably, and while there are many defenders for such a mode, there are easily just as many critiques dreading such an application. The very same could be said about Kirby, but on the other spectrum, Kirby was always created for beginners and casual players, hence not challenging many people, creating the desire for a hard mode. The Forgotten Land implies the illusion of offering such a mode from the beginning, but it's basically the regular game. It's the post-game where many Kirby entries require more skill, and every vivid fan can sing a song of most true arenas, facing off all the bosses in a row with limited health support. And if If you wish to make the regular game harder, forgo bonus times, boosting your stats or upgrading any copy abilities. It does not make the Forgotten Land hard, but certainly a little more difficult. While Kirby games are fundamentally easy but can become challenging, Elden Ring poses the opposite by being fundamentally hard with the option to become accessible. When discussing difficulty in Souls games, it's often implicated accessibility and an easy mode can be thrown into the same pot. However, Elden Ring is extremely accessible without an easy mode due to the many individual options you can choose to play the game. As I mentioned, you can simply choose to explore another area, run away and use overpowered magic or summon friends. These are only the methods I tried out so far, but I'm sure there are many other chances to lower the difficulty even further. The problem, however, that many supporters for an easy mode in Elden Ring don't understand is that it would actually require them to deal with the game and play it. Obviously this doesn't apply to all of them, but these people don't want an easy mode to get a gentle entrance to this harsh world, but a quote difficulty option that plays the game for you. And at this point, after so many Souls titles without such an option, it should be pretty apparent the developer simply doesn't want to add one, and the immense success proves them right. But what about the Kirby games? Am I a filthy hypocrite by wanting a hard mode in a Kirby game while gatekeeping Elden Ring? No. Just like Elden Ring, Kirby doesn't need a hard mode. Since I enjoy a difficult game and certainly doesn't reject the idea of Kirby titles offering a greater challenge, it's merely a nice to have. Understanding target groups is the key problem many do not want to face or accept, and although you might enjoy the mechanics, ideas and worlds of these titles, if their chosen difficulty bother you to a point you cannot enjoy the core experience, then they are simply not for you. A game made for everyone is a game loved by no one, and I find it quite ironic how Kirby can be both the most easy and brutal game ever, while Elden Ring has the possibility to portray both the most brutal and easy game ever. Either titles embody their respective spectrum on the difficulty curve so perfectly and are prime examples of focusing on one specific audience while keeping the other options in mind. We can sit here and talk about this never-ending discussion of difficulty all day, when instead we could focus on factors we can all agree on, the amazing bosses. Despite the fact I do have some personal gripes about some bosses of the Souls titles, for example relying too much on the classic roll, dodge, counterattack pattern and less gimmicky battles like chasing Mikolash and Bloodborne. Didn't I say I want to talk about stuff we all agree on? Most of them provide spectacular visuals and outstanding battle designs. Very rarely does a boss come across as unfair, and it always feels like it's my fault for not preparing properly, getting greedy or plainly having serious skill issues. My highlight were definitely the overworld bosses, especially the huge dragons where being on foot is practically a death sentence. Riding around the widespread area, coming close to the giant beast and using the perfect moment to counterattack adds so much flexibility to the otherwise standard boss design of these titles. Again, I'm not saying they are bad, but having these unexpected clashes that are not announced with a wall of fog makes the giant world alive and all the more dangerous. In a sense, it's reminiscent of Kirby Star Allies where bosses could appear throughout the world instead of at the end. If Star Allies would have been an open world platformer, your destination of World 1 would be King Dedede's castle, always in sight, and by entering a mysterious forest, you would encounter Wispy Woods as a surprise boss fight and appetizer for the upcoming castle. Does this ring a bell? Elden Ring is not only an open world title, but offers focused, tightly designed dungeons as well. This can be an underground cave, giant fortress or cliff, all of them resembling the traditional level design of Dark Souls. It's emphasized by the fact that you cannot summon your trusty companion and solely focus on your basic skills. Using this template as a foundation, an open world Kirby could tackle this approach in a similar manner by offering widespread areas completely focusing on exploration and smaller linear sections similar to the Forgotten Lands level design. Kirby's bosses do not need to hide, however. They might not be as challenging and are probably probably still in children's shoes when it comes to 3D. Nonetheless, the Forgotten Land offered a great first taste of what the Pink Glutton is and will be able to present. The reason why both titles show one of the best enemies in their respective genre, again despite aiming for something completely different, is simply the believable behavior of your opponent. They attack with more than 2 techniques and mix up their behavior depending on your position. Halving their energy, most of them start to enter a second phase and increase the stakes, in case of Elden Ring, sometimes quite heavily. At some point I was so into this comparison I could not unhear the classic Kirby boss energy sound starting to appear whenever I fought an Elden Ring boss. And not to speak of all the excessive rolling you have to do in both games. One very crucial part about the Souls games is the mysterious lore. As I mentioned, you experience the story by actually playing the game, recognizing locations, read the surroundings and observe item descriptions. You are basically the protagonist walking through a giant tome of legends already and about to happen. I cannot necessarily claim the same for Kirby, but people are at least just as crazy about Kirby's lore as for Elden Ring, because Kirby games are mere platformers, hence leaving only so much room for hiding interesting story snippets. The series uses a direction you do not really see in similar titles, the pause screen. By pressing the pause button during a boss fight, sometimes you get fascinating details about the background of your enemy and in some specific cases, the whole backstory to a certain extent. The Forgotten Land changed this approach by shifting the pause screen descriptions into unlockable figures, an arguably more favorable approach due to being able to read those texts whenever you like. Obviously, I'm not going to imply Kirby's lore is on par with the best of the Souls series. It's quite intriguing for a franchise for toddlers and sometimes surprisingly bittersweet, but not this outstanding deep narrative some people try to fantasize. Nevertheless, just like with Elden Ring, it enhances the series and characters beyond the beloved gameplay and lets players talk about these adventures even a decade later. Both titles put their gameplay on first place and strengthen it with lore, which is a way better approach than shoveling endless cutscenes into your throat, especially in the case of Kirby. There's the downside of missing essential details though. To be honest, I have still no idea what I'm actually doing in Elden Ring, but this is also the main strong point of such an approach. I enjoy fighting unbeatable bosses and explore dangerous dungeons, and not being bothered by story or cutscenes makes the whole experience so much more enjoyable. The very same goes for Kirby. For me, the lore is a nice to have, and I do not care that much for all the details, which is why I can simply decide to not read any descriptions. It's something the Metroid Prime series is also known for and still utterly underused when it comes to an interactive medium like games. Just playing the Forgotten Land and wandering around this abandoned place, which stays in direct contrast to Kirby's usual surroundings, create all sorts of questions in your head, and sometimes it's the best to leave certain questions unexplained. What do I actually want to express with this video beyond making an absurd yet kinda logical connection between these titles? Well, if you look beyond the horizon and break down certain experiences to their core, they have more in common than it appears. Elden Ring and Kirby wanted to hit a very specific nerve within their communities, and despite the fact they follow completely contrary design philosophies, at the end they are not so different after all. Sometimes it's the most unalike games that make up for the most intriguing discussions. To be honest, this is probably the strangest video I have done so far, since it feels kinda interesting knowing audiences from complete opposite series may be listening. But perhaps it also gave them a perspective of something they would never look into and perceive certain factors from another perspective. As a Kirby fan, I would absolutely enjoy a Kirby title akin to the difficulty of an Elden Ring, at least for one exception, and I think my favorite franchise could learn so much from Elden Ring's open exploration. After all, Kirby was always about exploring despite being seen as a mere platformer, and even though it sounds absurd, Elden Ring serves as a perfectly fine blueprint to further emphasize this perfectible side of Kirby.